The space station floated like a metal flower in the darkness between stars. They called it Orion 7, and it was the largest trading post in the known galaxy. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its many arms. Inside its great halls, creatures of all shapes and sizes walked together, talked together, and sometimes fought together. Today was special. Today was the Galactic Trade Summit, a meeting that happened only once every 10 years. Representatives from the most powerful empires had come to make deals, sign treaties, and show off their strength. The air inside the main hall smelled of strange perfumes and alien foods. Lights of every color floated near the ceiling, casting rainbow shadows on the polished floor. They were the first to arrive, as they always were. They were tall creatures, standing 7 feet high, with scales that shone like green metal. Their eyes were yellow and cold, like the eyes of snakes. They walked with their heads held high, looking down at everyone else. For 3,000 years, they had ruled this part of space. They believed they were the greatest warriors the universe had ever seen. Commander stood at the front of the group. He was taller than the others, and his scales were darker, almost black at the edges. On his hip hung a weapon that made other warriors step back in fear. It was a plasma blade, forged in the heart of a dying star. The blade glowed with blue fire that never went out. It was said that nothing in the galaxy could stand against it. Had killed 30 enemies with that sword. He liked to tell people this number again and again. The other delegations arrived one by one. They came, floating in their water-filled suits. They came, clicking their insect legs on the metal floor. They came, their fur brushed and shining. Each group brought their finest warriors, their best diplomats, their most precious gifts. And then the humans came. A small ship had docked at the far end of the station, in a spot usually saved for cargo vessels. The human delegation walked through the halls slowly, looking around with curious eyes. There were only 12 of them. Compared to the hundreds of aliens filling the great hall, they seemed very small and very alone. The other races watched them with something between pity and amusement. Humans were new to space. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were weak. Their bodies were soft and easily broken. Most of the elder races thought humans were like children who had wandered into a room full of adults. Ambassador led the human group. He was a man of 50 years, with gray hair and a face that showed no fear. He had spent his whole life preparing humanity for this moment. Behind him walked soldiers, scientists, and diplomats. They wore simple gray uniforms with no decorations. At the back of the group walked a woman named. She was not tall. She was not loud. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her face was calm like still water. She was listed as a cultural, someone who carried information about human history and traditions. Most people did not notice her at all. But some noticed what she carried at her hip. It was a sword, not a plasma blade, not a laser cutter, not any of the advanced weapons that other races carried. It was a sword made of metal, wrapped in old cloth that had been mended many times. The handle was worn smooth by countless hands. The guard was simple and plain. Commander saw the sword and he laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was a loud, barking sound that made everyone in the hall turn to look. His yellow eyes were bright with cruel amusement. He spoke in his own language, and his translator device turned his words into the common tongue for all to hear. "Look at this," shouted, pointing at. "The humans bring a warrior with a cooking knife." Some of the other aliens laughed too. They clicked in what might have been amusement. Even some of them bubbled in their tanks. Walked toward the human group. His soldiers followed behind him. The crowd parted to let them through. Ambassador stepped forward, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture, but ignored him completely. The commander stopped directly in front of. He was so much taller than her. His shadow covered her completely. Up close, she could smell the oil he used on his scales and the strange spice of his breath. "What is that thing?" asked, pointing at her sword. "Is it a toy, something you found in the garbage?" Looked up at him, Her face did not change. Her eyes were dark and deep like pools of water in a cave. She said nothing. Reached out with one clawed hand. "Let me see this relic of savages." "No." The word was quiet, but it stopped like a wall. The laughter in the hall died away. Everyone was watching now. "No," repeated. His translator made the word sound like a curse. "You dare refuse me." "The sword stays with me," said. Her voice was calm. She might have been talking about the weather or the color of the walls. "It is not for touching." His yellow eyes narrowed. For a moment something dangerous flickered in their depths. Then he smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Very well, little human, keep your rusty toy." He turned to address the whole hall, spreading his arms wide. "Let everyone see what humanity brings to the stars. Not weapons of power, but broken metal. Not warriors, but keepers of junk." More laughter filled the hall. Walked back to his delegation, accepting their praise and their jokes. The moment seemed to be over. Ambassador touched shoulder gently. "Are you all right?" he asked in a low voice. Nodded slowly. She was still looking at back. "He will challenge us," she said. "Before this summit ends, he will demand blood." "You think so?" "I know so." His hand rested on the wrapped handle of her sword. "His kind always does." Frowned, "And if he does, we cannot match their weapons. Their plasma blades can cut through anything." Was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the summit began in earnest. Aliens moved to their places. Discussions started, but stood still, her dark eyes thoughtful. "My grandmother told me something before I left Earth," she finally said. "She told me that they would not understand what we carry. She told me to show them." "Show them what?" Did not answer. She simply unwrapped the cloth from her sword just enough to reveal a glimpse of the blade beneath. The metal was old. It was marked with spots of rust and repair. It looked like it might break if someone held it too tightly. But had been a soldier once, long ago. He knew how to look at a weapon, and something in that ancient blade made his heart beat faster. "What is that sword?" he whispered. Wrapped it again carefully, almost tenderly. "It is 400 years of stubbornness," she said, "and it has never lost a fight. 400 years before stood in that alien hall, the world was burning. Earth had torn itself apart in the unification wars. Nations that had stood for centuries crumbled into dust. Cities became graves. Rivers ran dark with ash. It was the worst time in human history, and many believed it would also be the last." In a small village in the mountains, a woman named watched the fires on the horizon. She was young, only 22 years old, but her eyes were already old from seeing too much death. Her husband had gone to fight and had not come back. Her parents had died when the bombs fell on the city below. She was alone now, with nothing but a small house, a plot of dead farmland, and a sword. The sword had belonged to her grandfather. He had forged it himself in a tiny workshop behind their home. He was not a famous. He was just a farmer who liked to work with metal in his spare time. The sword was not beautiful. It was not perfectly balanced. But it was strong and it was sharp, and it had kept her family safe for 3 generations. Now picked it up and walked down the mountain to fight. She did not fight for any nation. She did not fight for any flag. She fought for the people in her valley, the survivors who had nowhere else to go. She fought against anyone who came to take what little they had left, and somehow, against all odds, she won. The war ended eventually. A new government rose from the ashes, returned to her village and hung the sword on the wall. She married again, had children and grew old, but she never forgot what the sword had done for her. Before she died, she gave the sword to her daughter with these words, "This blade is not just metal. It is the promise that we will survive. Take care of it, add to it, make it stronger, and pass it on." Her daughter did exactly that. The years passed, the decades passed. The sword was passed from mother to daughter, from father to son, through 17 generations of one family. Each bearer left their mark on it. His daughter added a new edge, made from iron she had pulled from the ruins of an old factory. Her son reforged the handle using wood from a tree that had survived the war. His daughter folded new metal into the blade, again and again, making it harder and more flexible. When a meteor fell near their village, they collected the strange metal from space and worked it into the steel. When scientists discovered carbon nanotubes, a great-grandson who had become an engineer found a way to bond them to the blade at the molecular level. When humanity finally reached the stars, the sword went with them. It was broken 3 times, once in a house fire, once when a wall collapsed during an earthquake, once when a great-great-granddaughter used it to hold a door closed against raiders, and the lock shattered the blade in half. Each time the family gathered the pieces and forged them back together, adding new metal, new strength, new memories. The sword was ugly now. Its surface was covered with the marks of its history. Spots of rust showed where it had been wet for too long. Lines of repair showed where it had been broken and mended. The edge was uneven in places, sharper in some spots than others. No museum would display it. No collector would buy it. But inside that metal was the strength of 400 years, the stubbornness of 17 generations, the promise that no matter what happened, the family would survive. His grandmother was named Miso. She was 112 years old, kept alive by the medical miracles of the future, but still sharp in mind and spirit. She had carried the sword for 30 years before passing it too. The night before left for the space station, she sat with her grandmother in the old family home on Earth. The house was small and simple, surrounded by trees that had been planted by ancestors whose names they no longer remembered. The sword lay on the table between them, unwrapped, its battered surface catching the lamplight. "They will laugh at you," Miso said. Her voice was thin with age but strong with certainty. "The aliens. They will look at our blade and see only rust and ruin." "I know," said. "They will not understand." Miso reached out and touched the sword gently, her wrinkled fingers tracing the lines of old repairs. "How could they? Their weapons are made in factories by machines. They have never felt the weight of inheritance." Nodded. She had heard this story many times, but she never grew tired of it. Each telling added something new, some detail her grandmother had remembered from her own grandmother's telling. "Was afraid," Miso said softly. "Did you know that? When she walked down the mountain to fight, she was terrified. She thought she would die. She thought the sword would break. She thought everything would end. But it didn't." "No, it didn't." Miso smiled, and for a moment she looked young again. "That is what the aliens will never understand about humans. We are always afraid. We are always tired. We always think we are going to lose, but we fight anyway. We survive anyway. We keep going anyway." She picked up the sword and held it out too. The blade was heavy with more than just metal. "When they mock you, remember this. When they laugh at you, remember this. When they think they have won, remember this." Miso's eyes were bright with tears and pride. "This sword has been broken 3 times. 3 times, and 3 times our family put it back together. That is what we do. That is what we have always done." Took the sword. It felt warm in her hands, as if all the people who had held it before were still there, giving her their strength. "What if I fail?" she whispered. Miso laughed. It was a dry, crackling sound, but full of love. "Then you fail, and whoever comes after you will pick up the pieces and try again. That is the promise, not that we will always win, but that we will always try." Wrapped the sword in its cloth and tied it to her hip. She kissed her grandmother's forehead and walked to the door. "Show them," Miso called after her. "Show them what 400 years of stubbornness looks like." Did not look back. She did not need to. The weight of the sword at her side told her everything she needed to know. 17 generations had carried this blade. 17 generations had added their strength to it. 17 generations had refused to give up, refused to surrender, refused to let the fire go out. Now it was her turn. And she would not let them down. 3 days passed on the station. 3 days of meetings, arguments, and careful words. The human delegation worked hard to prove themselves. They offered trade agreements and scientific knowledge. They promised friendship and cooperation. But everywhere they went, they felt the cold eyes of the elder races watching them with doubt. Commander made things worse. He followed the humans like a shadow, appearing at their meetings, standing in their hallways, always with that cruel smile on his scaled face. He never touched them. He never threatened them directly. But his presence was a constant reminder that humanity was small, weak, and unwelcome. On the third night, the station held a great feast. All the delegations gathered in the central hall, which had been decorated with floating lights and flowing fabrics. Tables were piled with foods from 100 worlds. Music played from hidden speakers, a strange mix of sounds that somehow pleased every ear. Ambassador stood near the human table, talking quietly with a diplomat, sat alone, eating little, watching everything. The sword was still at her hip. She had not removed it since arriving on the station. Approached slowly, a cup of dark liquid in his clawed hand. His soldiers spread out behind him, blocking the exits. The other aliens in the hall noticed this and stopped their conversations. Something was about to happen. Ambassador said loudly, making sure everyone could hear, "I have a question about human customs." Turned to face him. His face was calm, but his hands were tight at his sides. "Of course, Commander. How can I help?" "Among my people, we believe that weapons are sacred. A warrior's blade is the measure of their soul," gestured at the plasma sword on his hip. "This blade was forged in the fires of a star. It has killed 30 enemies. It is my pride and my honor." He pointed at without looking at her. "Your cultural carries a weapon that looks like it was pulled from a garbage pile. Is this also sacred to humans, or do you simply not know any better?" The hall was silent. Every eye was on the humans now. Opened his mouth to respond, but stood up before he could speak. "It is sacred," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the entire hall. "More sacred than you can understand." Laughed. "Sacred. That rusty piece of scrap." He walked toward her, his boots heavy on the metal floor. "I have seen the weapons of 100 races. I have fought the greatest warriors in the galaxy. And I tell you now, little human, that what you carry is an insult to the very idea of a blade." "You are wrong." The words were simple, but they hit like a slap. His laughter stopped. His yellow eyes narrowed to thin slits. Behind him, his soldiers shifted uneasily. "What did you say to me?" "I said you are wrong," stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She was so much smaller than him. Her head barely reached his chest, but she did not look afraid. "You think a weapon is measured by its shine, by its power, by how many it has killed, but you are wrong." Scales flushed darker, a sign of anger among his kind. "You dare to lecture me about weapons, you who carry a blade that would break against the weakest armor. Then break it." The hall gasped, even stepped forward in alarm, but held up a hand to stop him. "If my blade is so weak," she continued, "then prove it. Challenge me to a duel, your perfect weapon against my broken one, your 3,000 years of warriors against my 400 years of stubbornness." Stared at her. For a long moment no one moved. The tension in the hall was so thick it was hard to breathe. Then smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of teeth and hunger. "You want a duel," he said softly. "You truly want to die that badly." "I want to show you something," replied. "Something your kind has never understood about mine." Threw his head back and laughed. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. "Very well, little human. I accept your challenge. Let it be witnessed by all the races here that a human woman asked to fight me, and I agreed." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "Tomorrow at midday, in the combat arena, I will show you all what happens when children play at war. I will cut through her rusty blade like paper. I will end this farce once and for all." The crowd murmured. Some looked excited. Others looked worried. A few of the smaller races slipped away quietly, not wanting to witness what was sure to be a massacre. Grabbed's arm as walked away. "What have you done?" he whispered urgently. "His blade can cut through starship armor. No known material can stop it." "I know." "Then why did you challenge him?" Looked at the ambassador with calm, steady eyes. "Because he was going to challenge us anyway. Tonight, tomorrow, the next day. He would not let us leave without blood. I simply chose the time and place." "But you'll die." "Maybe," touched the wrapped handle of her sword, "but I don't think so." "How can you be so calm? How can you?" "Ambassador's voice was gentle but firm. "Do you know how many times this sword has been broken?" Blinked at the strange question. "No." "3 times, once in fire, once under stone, once against a locked door that would not open," smiled slightly. "Each time my family gathered the pieces and made it whole again. Each time they added something new. Each time they made it stronger." She began to walk toward the door, toward the small room where she would spend her last night before the duel. "Commander thinks my sword is weak because it is old and ugly," she said over her shoulder. "But he has never seen what old and ugly things can do when they refuse to die." Watched her go, his heart heavy with fear and something else, something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. It was small and it was foolish and it made no sense, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, the universe was about to learn something new about humanity. The combat arena was the oldest part of the station. It had been built 2,000 years ago, when the first claimed this region of space. The walls were made of black stone brought from their home world. The floor was a circle of white sand, stained in places by the blood of countless duels. Around the circle rose rows of seats, and today every seat was filled. They came from every race on the station. The floated in their water suits. The clicked and whispered to each other. The watched with wide, worried eyes. Even races that usually stayed hidden had come out to see this fight. Word had spread quickly. A human woman had challenged the greatest warrior of the. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Most of them expected to see a quick death. Commander entered first. He wore armor made of the same black stone as the walls, polished until it shone like glass. His plasma blade hung at his side, not yet activated. He walked to the center of the arena and raised his arms, accepting the cheers and shouts of the crowd. "Today," he announced, "you will see why the rule the stars. Today, you will see why no other race can stand against us. Today, I will show you what happens when primitives forget their place." The crowd roared, smiled, showing all his teeth. Then entered. She wore no armor. Her gray uniform was the same one she had worn at the feast. Her feet were bare, her toes gripping the cold sand. Her hair was tied back in its simple knot. She looked small and fragile and completely outmatched. In her hands she carried the sword. The cloth was gone now. The blade was fully visible for the first time. The crowd fell silent as they saw it. Even smile faded for a moment. The sword was ugly. There was no other word for it. The metal was dark in some places, bright in others. Lines of repair ran across its surface like old scars. Spots of rust dotted the flat of the blade. The edge was uneven, sharpened by hand over countless years. It looked like something that belonged in a museum of ancient history, not in a battle against the most advanced weapon in the galaxy. Laughed. The sound was forced, but it was enough to restart the noise of the crowd. "Is that it? Is that the great human weapon?" Said nothing. She walked to the center of the arena and faced him, holding her sword in both hands. "Very well," said. He reached for his plasma blade and activated it. The weapon hummed to life, a bar of blue fire that lit up his face with cold light. "Let us end this quickly. I have more important things to do today." He lunged. Was fast, faster than any human could be. His blade was a streak of blue light aimed directly at its chest. It was a killing blow, meant to end the fight in one stroke. Moved. No one in the crowd could say exactly what happened. One moment she was standing still. The next moment she was somewhere else. His blade passed through empty air. Before he could recover was behind him. She did not strike, she simply waited. Spun around, his yellow eyes wide with surprise. You dodged. Yes. How humans are slow, your bodies are weak. Took her stance again. Her sword was held low, pointed at the ground. Her feet were spread wide, her weight perfectly balanced. You know nothing about humans, she said quietly. You see our bodies and think you see our limits, but you are wrong. Snarled and attacked again. This time he was faster. His blade was a whirlwind of blue fire striking from every angle, left, right, up, down. Each strike could cut through starship armor. Each strike could kill a dozen warriors. Flowed around them like water. Her footwork was ancient. It had been passed down through generations of warriors who had learned to fight against enemies bigger, stronger, and better armed than themselves. It was the footwork of farmers who had faced soldiers, of villagers who had faced armies, of survivors who had faced the end of the world. She did not try to match his power. She did not try to block his blows. She simply was not where his blade was. Every time he struck, she moved. Every time he lunged, she turned. Every time he thought he had her, she slipped away. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This was not possible. This could not be happening. Finally, roared in frustration and brought his blade down with all his strength. It was a blow that could split a mountain, a blow that nothing could survive. Raised her sword to meet it. The plasma blade met the corroded steel with a sound like thunder. Blue fire splashed against dark metal. The force of the blow should have shattered the old sword into 1,000 pieces. The blade held. Stared, the crowd gasped. Even the soldiers watching from the sides took a step back. That's impossible, whispered. Nothing can stop my blade, nothing. This is not nothing, said. Her arms were shaking from the force of the blow, but her voice was steady. This is 400 years of learning, 400 years of failing and trying again, 400 years of refusing to give up. She pushed his blade aside and stepped back, creating distance between them. Your sword was forged in the heart of a star, she continued. It is powerful, it is beautiful, it is perfect, but it has no history, no memory, no weight of inheritance. Looked at her own blade. The old metal seemed to glow in the arena lights. This sword was forged by a farmer in a tiny workshop. It was broken by fire, by stone, by war. Each time my family put it back together. Each time they added something new. Metal from a meteor, carbon from the ashes of a shrine, iron from the chains of a freed prisoner, nanotubes bonded at the molecular level by a great-grandson who was an engineer. She met's eyes. Your sword was made to be unbreakable. My sword was made to survive being broken. Screamed and attacked again. His movements were wild now, desperate. He struck again and again, pouring all his strength and fury into every blow. Blocked she. She turned each strike aside. Her old blade met his perfect weapon again and again, and again and again her blade held. Then she saw her opening. One strike, just one. Moved faster than she had ever moved before. Her blade slipped past his guard, past his armor, past the containment field of his plasma sword. The old metal touched the weapon's core, and passed through it like it was not even there. The plasma blade exploded. Blue fire scattered across the arena in a shower of harmless sparks. The weapon that had killed 30 enemies, the weapon forged in the heart of a dying star, fell to the ground in 2 smoking pieces. Stood frozen, his clawed hand still gripping half a handle. His yellow eyes were wide with shock and something else. Fear. Lowered her sword. It was not even scratched. The arena was completely silent. Then slowly, the crowd began to murmur. The murmur grew to a roar. Aliens who had never seen a human before were standing, pointing, shouting in a dozen languages. The impossible had happened. A rusty blade had defeated the stars. The arena fell into a silence so deep that could hear her own heartbeat. Thousands of aliens stared at her from the seats above. None of them moved. None of them spoke. It was as if the universe itself had stopped to watch. Commander stood before her, the broken pieces of his plasma blade still smoking in his hands. His scales had gone pale, almost gray. His yellow eyes were empty, like windows into a house where no one lived anymore. Sheathed her sword. The old metal slid into its cloth wrapping with a soft whisper. She looked at not with triumph or pride, but with something close to pity. "You built your weapon to be perfect," she said quietly. Her voice carried through the silent arena. "We built ours to survive." Said nothing. He could not. For the first time in his long life, he had met something he could not understand. His blade had been forged by the greatest smiths of his empire in fires hotter than any sun. It had been tested against every material known to science. It had never failed. Until today. Until a human woman with a rusty sword had walked into his arena and shown him that perfection was not the same as strength. The broken pieces of the plasma blade fell from his hands and landed in the white sand. He stared at them for a long moment. Then slowly, he dropped to one knee. "I yield," he said. His voice was hoarse, broken. "The duel is yours." The crowd exploded. Aliens shouted in 100 languages. Some cheered. Some cried out in disbelief. Some simply sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Ambassador rushed onto the arena floor, his gray uniform flapping behind him. He reached and grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wide with joy and amazement. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." Smiled tiredly. The fight had taken more from her than she had expected. Her arms ached, her legs trembled, but her heart was full. "I had help," she said, touching the wrapped sword at her hip. 17 generations of help. The soldiers moved forward, surrounding their fallen commander. For a moment, thought they might attack, but instead they formed a ring of honor around him and helped him to his feet. Whatever else they were, they respected the laws of combat, had lost fairly. There was no shame in that. No, that was not quite true. There was shame, but it was a different kind of shame than losing to a stronger enemy. It was the shame of having underestimated an opponent so completely. The days that followed changed everything. The negotiations shifted. Where before the humans had been ignored or mocked, now they were treated with careful respect. The elder races still did not fully understand what had happened in the arena, but they understood results. A human weapon had defeated a weapon. A human woman had beaten a commander. These facts could not be. Trade agreements were signed. Treaties were made. Humanity took its first real steps onto the galactic stage, not as children but as equals. 3 days after the duel, the ambassador came to the human quarters. He was an old creature, his scales faded to soft green, his eyes clouded with age. But his voice was clear when he spoke. "The woman," he said to Ambassador, "the one with the sword, I would speak with her." Came forward, her sword at her hip as always. The old studied her for a long moment. Then he asked the question that everyone on the station had been asking. "How? Our scientists have analyzed the recording of the duel 1,000 times. Your blade should not have survived. Your blade should not have been able to cut through the plasma field. It defies everything we know about physics and metallurgy." Was quiet for a moment. Then she unwrapped her sword and held it up, letting the old ambassador see its imperfect surface. "Do you know how many times this sword has been broken?" she asked. "No." 3 times, once in fire, once under stone, once against a locked door. Ran her fingers along the lines of repair. "Each time my family gathered the pieces. Each time they forged it together again. Each time they added something new, better metal, stronger alloys, new techniques learned from failure." She looked at the ambassador with steady eyes. "Your weapons are made once and never changed. Our weapons are made 1,000 times, always changing, always improving. You see our sword as broken. We see it as educated." The ambassador was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Would you teach us this technique of yours, this method of making strength from failure?" Smiled, "I can teach you how to fold steel. I can teach you how to bond new materials to old metal, but the centuries of stubbornness," she shook her head gently, "that you must find yourselves." The ambassador bowed his head. It was a gesture of deep respect, rarely given to anyone outside his own race. "Perhaps we will learn," he said. "Perhaps in time we will understand." "Perhaps," agreed. "That is all any of us can do, try, fail, and try again." Back on Earth, in the small house surrounded by old trees, Miso received the news. The message came on a small screen, with images of the duel and recordings of the crowd's reaction. She watched her granddaughter defeat the greatest warrior of the Empire with the sword that Miso herself had carried for 30 years. She watched the plasma blade shatter. She watched fall to his knees. And then she laughed. It started as a small sound, a chuckle deep in her old chest. But it grew and grew until she was laughing so hard that tears ran down her wrinkled face. She whispered, speaking to the ancestor who had first carried the sword down a burning mountain 400 years ago. "Do you see? Do you see what your blade has done?" Of course there was no answer, had been dead for centuries, but Miso liked to think that somewhere, somehow, all the people who had ever carried the sword were watching. All 17 generations of stubborn, hopeful, never-give-up humans. She placed her hand on the empty space on the wall where the sword had once hung. The hook was still there, waiting for the blade to come home. "They laughed at us," she said softly. "They called us primitives. They thought our weapon was garbage." She smiled, and her smile was the same smile that had worn in the arena. The smile of someone who knew something that others did not. "They did not understand," Miso whispered. "They looked at our sword and saw rust and ruin. They did not see the 400 years of fighting, the 17 generations of refusing to die, the countless hands that had held it, mended it, loved it, and passed it on." She closed her eyes and remembered her own grandmother putting the sword into her young hands for the first time. She remembered the weight of it, the promise of it. "We are not perfect," she said to the empty room. "We are not powerful. We are not beautiful or advanced or blessed by the stars." She opened her eyes and looked at the screen again, where her granddaughter stood victorious in an alien arena, surrounded by beings who were finally beginning to understand. "We are just humans, and humans do not know how to stop." Outside, the sun was setting over the old trees. Birds sang in the branches. A gentle wind carried the smell of flowers through the open window. Miso sat in her chair and watched the light fade, thinking about swords and stubbornness, and the endless, unbreakable chain of human survival. Somewhere among the stars, her granddaughter was coming home. And the sword was coming with her. 17 generations, 400 years, 3 times broken, never defeated. That was humanity's gift to the universe. Not weapons of power, not ships of war, just a simple promise written in old steel and stubborn hearts. We will survive, we will endure, we will never stop trying. And when we fall, we will get back up again. Always.